Man, I meant to brush my teeth so that.
Yeah, me too, but I didn't.
No.
Stinky pigs. I did.
Get on you, Jake. Today we're gonna be talking about scrapes. We got John Lewis and Jake Lynch in the house, literally in my house.
First time.
Present.
Yeah.
First time I've been in a place of your living. That's
And-
like, you can tell you're actually living here.
And probably since 7 years ago, I would guess, since I was in that apartment in Iowa.
Yeah.
The
I mean,
pink
Warb's
room.
house doesn't count.
Yeah.
That wasn't really a place of...
It was like a temporary, very temporary, like people
I mean,
would
I
pop
really
in and
just
out of
feel
that
like if
house.
there's carpet in the bathroom, it's not a place of living.
There isn't anymore.
I know.
They changed it. It's crazy.
That was the weirdest thing out there. And in the kitchen.
And actually a lot of people's houses in
Yeah.
Iowa, it's
Yeah.
like carpet in the kitchen bathroom.
Just
Like,
an Iowa thing.
I think it's just maybe slightly outdated. Just like something they hadn't quite transitioned to the norm there yet.
Yeah, that's real weird.
Kind of gross.
You kind of see what ends up on my bathroom floor, and to think that if that was carpet.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking, yeah, man,
All
there might be little urine stains on that one. Yeah, the funny thing is, too, when Sean was living there, or maybe he wasn't even living there, he had a few too many drinks and was sleepwalking, peed on the carpet in front of the sink.
Oh, like a dog.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was one of those deals that, really
I
makes
used
you
to
wish you
try
didn't
to
have
do that when I
carpet.
was a kid. I wouldn't be having too many drinks, I don't think. My dad, I would sleepwalk all the time, and I would try to eat dog treats and pee in closets and stuff.
I did that too. I
Yeah.
peed in weird places.
Yeah.
I peed in the clothes hamper one time.
Yep.
It's nice. But yeah.
The weirdest thing I ever sleepwalked, this will be real quick, was that when I was living with Barber and Chantel, and my parents, I forget what, for my birthday or something, I had this grilling package of a bunch of different barbecue sauces, and I woke up in the middle of the night and apparently pulled them all out. I went into their kitchen, moved stuff all around. I woke up the next morning and I was hugging this empty box of barbecue sauce. And I come out and I go into the bathroom and there's an open thing of barbecue sauce on the toilet. And I go into the kitchen and Eric's just what did you do last night? And I just sleepwalked around, moved stuff, and found
Don't
that
really
box
remember
of
any of it?
None of it.
Yeah.
Nope.
That's the creepy thing about it is you wake up and somebody's either tells you what you did or you see signs of what you did and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Ted sleepwalks a lot. I'm
Really?
sure you've heard some of those stories.
Some.
Man. I could tell you.
He
could probably
seems
do a
like
whole
that when you
podcast on
you
that.
wake him up. He looks like he could have just been done sleepwalking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
wild.
That's funny.
So today we're going to be talking about scrapes. We're actually getting ready to go elk hunting. There's a rifle season that we're going to go participate in, but we want to talk about scrapes mostly because we feel that that's something that's coming up. It's kind of the next thing. But you guys were just saying that you've been really using scrapes to your advantage really since the season started.
Yeah, I mean, I say that us as our whole group. I mean, we focus on scrapes pretty much year round,
Right.
whether it's for gaining intel, especially if you find the right ones. You have those ones where a buck's just fired up and just is going to make one, but you find those community ones that deer hitting year round. There's a good chance that you're going to find or the bucks in the area are eventually going to hit that, whether
Yeah.
they're checking for does or whatever that is. I've noticed in the last week, just from cameras and stuff that I've had out, just all sorts of bucks showing up, and they're all on, more community scrapes, where it's been does all summer and stuff and early fall, and now it's just oh, there's a new buck. Oh, there's a new buck. And it's
Where
5
they
a week.
coming from?
Yeah, and they're just starting to do that, and most of it's at night. But early season, I mean, we did that, the island trip, and besides, we lost one buck that Cody hit. He shot that over a scrape. Brett shot that one over a scrape the first night, and Kyle shot one over a scrape, and that was September 15th, 2 on September 15th, and Kyle's, I think, second one was the 19th.
Yeah, something like that.
But that was all that we were
And those bucks were
hunting.
in velvet too, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
Kyle's second one. So the Cody's was in velvet that he hit, which I need to show you that footage and see what your thoughts are on it because it's interesting. Brett's was in velvet, Ross's was in velvet, and Kyle's first buck was in velvet. I mean, that's like more. That's the most deer that we've. I mean, it was a very unique situation, but that was like the whole goal of that. If you were sitting somewhere, was scrapes.
Yeah.
And we just ran, and the way we found those deer was we ran cameras on those same scrapes in the summer, and all those bucks were on those scrapes. Or the one Brett shot was on a mock scrape. So that was a little more interesting of a situation. There wasn't anything there, but it was just like a spot that made sense. And he made one, and that deer was 7.5 years old, and he found it, and it was just like boom, boom, boom. Like he just like fell in love with it.
Every other day for like a couple weeks, right? Before you got there.
Yeah. It was like, clockwork pretty much.
So how did you guys find these in the summer, or whoever it was that put the cameras there? What was that strategy? Just like covering ground, just looking transition lines, and then picking out licking branches and stuff?
For as far as like finding active scrapes or finding like spots that we wanted to make mock scrapes?
Mostly where you had the cameras set up during the summer and then you guys ultimately set up. So like how were those places found, or was it like before season just anticipating that these are going to be like annual scrapes? Is that kind of how it was?
Yeah, I mean there's a couple. I think a lot of times too when you get into like a good idea of that, it's probably a scrape that's going to be used year round, is they kind of coincide with like a transition area or like a funnel that deer are naturally moving through anyway. You know, like I was saying before, where you have those ones that it's just like, you know, a buck may, you know, walk through this wide open timber one time in the fall and be
Pull up a spot
ticked
over
off
and,
and
over again.
yeah, but like that's probably it. But like, yeah, so a lot of them were, you can find them too, like ones that have been hit year after year after year. Because if you look at the ground, especially like where we're at, where we don't have like a lot of like build
Leaf
up,
matter.
leaf matter, like you'll see the roots, you know, of the trees and the plants, and a lot of times they're broken off, and you can see like layers and layers. And honestly, when you find one that's, you know, hit year round, you'll just smell it. Like if you open that thing up, it's like, whoa, that thing stinks. And then, you know, obviously you're licking branches and stuff like that, but you can see they're kind of like
A depression
into the ground. But yeah, so I guess to answer your question, was a lot of it was just, and I didn't do it, it was a lot of Chris spent a lot of time just like hitting new areas, running through them, finding them, opening them up. One thing that we like to do too is make them absolutely enormous.
Huge. Yeah, like you can't miss it.
Yeah, like if he's walking on the ridge and like looks down, he's going to be like, what is that? You know? And then you have that visual cue too. So yeah, just covering ground and finding them, and then open them up, and then we use, you know, some synthetic scents. Like it's buck fever, so we use like the forehead gland, which is like super potent smell. It's like almost like a vanilla smell. So
Do you ever try it like taste wise?
it's not that great. The biggest thing with it is if you're in bear country, to make sure you keep it off your hands.
Yeah.
It's because like I have so many cameras get ripped off trees because the bears absolutely love it.
Interesting.
And they like, I get bears on all my scrapes just because it's like a sweet smell, but the deer like it too. So yeah, so we do that, and then you know, let them ride for however long, and if nothing's really showing up, go.
What percentage of those cameras would you say are successful at finding like bucks? So like let's say you run 10 cameras. This is just for the sake of saying a number. Like how many out of 10 would you expect when you find one of those annual scrapes? Would you say that you're going to find a shooter buck appear even just a couple of times? Would you say it's 10 out of 10, or is it 5 out of 10, 2 out of 10?
Probably. I mean, without really like looking into it deeply, maybe 3. But I
Okay.
guess it also depends what your definition of a shooter buck is.
Right.
You know, for like this, we weren't looking for huge deer by any means. We were just looking for bucks. So that and there was a super high deer population there too. So that would be, I would say, was way higher because it wasn't like we were looking for anything super mature or anything like that. We were just looking for kind of the experience of it. But I'd say like around me, it's hard to say too because I've been there long enough that like I kind of know
which ones are
at least where there's probably a big deer hanging out, and then I can key into it a little bit more. I'd say like 3 out of 10s probably.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good ratio.
And that's, in like a pretty big woods setting.
Mm-hmm.
If you're running them on like a field edge or something in the Midwest, that probably is going to go way up.
Mm-hmm. I always think of like the difference, you've already touched on it a little bit, but that difference between like the annual scrape that is just a big, heavily hit. It's got those things like the depression, no leaves, multiple licking branches a lot of times, versus the just kind of tapped on his way back to, or out to feed or back to bed. And there's advantages to both, because I do think that those ones that are real quick hit, like one after another, if there's a sign in there that's telling you that it is a big buck doing it, and it's like, hey, that was last night, maybe he's pointing you right into a direction of where he's at today.
Right.
But if those are found 2 or 3 days after the fact, they're already likely irrelevant.
Right.
Not to say that, he's not still hanging around there. It might still be worth investigating more area around there, and maybe you do find that, annual scrape where there's a funnel or just a congregation of trails. But what I do like, and what I feel like you guys are talking about a lot of when you're putting these cameras up and stuff and looking for these scrapes, is just that really, I don't want to say that it's obvious, because I think that if you're newer to looking for scrapes, it probably isn't that obvious. But if you're finding multiple trails and like really obvious trails, like trails that are really worn into the ground, there's a lot of tracks on them, when those intersect, and a lot of times that will be on a transition line. So for example, you're working a transition, and let's just say you've got a brushier habitat on your right side and open hardwoods on your left, and then somewhere out of that brushy habitat a trail intersects with that transition line trail. And then you find the big old scrape, twisted up licking branches. Those are the types of places that it's like, ooh.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a good feeling that if there's a buck around here this year, he's going to be hitting this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that as the season progresses, their loops just continue to get a little bit wider. And like you said, too, they do a lot of that at night, I think. But if you can find them close to places where they're bedding and almost just backtrack, like let's say you find 4 community scrapes in a big area. Well, maybe by finding those, you got a pin, you connect the dots kind of, and you're like, well, maybe that's where he's bedding, and then you can just continue to hone in on that spot. But I feel like this time of the year, this second half of October, man, you can start getting pretty dialed in on a buck hitting a scrape, even if you don't have cameras, just by looking at how blown up one is. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
You remember the buck that Luke Nissen shot in 2017? It was, Greg filmed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like our first year of THP.
It was in that like real thick cedar. Yeah. Yep.
So basically what was happening there is all of a sudden Luke finds this scrape that's just obliterated. Like every direction around this tree, this scrape is hit. Starts running a camera on it, and that punk showed up like twice a day.
Yeah.
And
because he was right there.
Yeah, in that situation, I think he's right on top of his bedding area.
Yeah.
Now, it's not as simple as you find a scrape and that's going to happen when a monster buck shows up twice a day. But I think that the more of those that you can find, and again, connecting those dots is just extremely helpful. And then to your point, too, of getting an inventory, at some point or another, most bucks or all bucks in that general vicinity are going to hit that scrape.
Right, when you find the right, yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes down to they hit a trail. Deer, just like a dog or, any wild animal, really uses its nose so much that they're just going to start tracking other deer, ultimately leading them to that scrape. And that's how I think.
And the other thing is that I look at like a lot of those, like I was saying, like focusing on those does. Like in the summer or whatnot, you find a scrape and it's like, oh, there's 6 does hitting this, like, don't just be like, there's no bucks there. Like, that is going to be,
that's a good point.
That's like when they're starting to kind of figure out, like, if he knows that's there and those does are hitting that, why would he go anywhere else to see to smell stuff? Mm-hmm. He's going to go right there because he's like, I'm in this pocket of does, I want to see what's going on. Mm-hmm. So, like, I think, scrapes, sometimes they get the mentality of, like, for buck and intel, but, like, also, like, in the bigger timber and stuff, like, I want to know where those pockets of does are.
Yep.
And, like, if you can find that scrape that all those does are hitting, like, well, you just concentrated that to probably a spot that he's going to come check, even if he's 3 miles away right now. Mm-hmm. And you find that in a terrain feature that's huntable, and you can get in and out, like, you're bulletproof.
I do want to circle back and talk about setting up on scrapes and hunting, like, right on scrapes, and kind of incorporate a little bit more of the mock scrape stuff. But first I want to quickly touch on, like, how I think scrapes and bucks use those to figure out more about those, because I have in recent years been paying more and more attention to this, and it just seems to hold true everywhere I go. Go back to that example where you've got brush on your right, open hardwoods on your left. If we can assume that just for real generic, or being very general here, if those does are bedding in that brushy stuff, and let's say there's 200 yards of edge there, if they're bedding somewhere in there, I think I hear a lot of people talk about being downwind of a doe bedding area, and I think that to some degree bucks can, I mean, certainly if there's a hot doe in there and he's upwind or downwind of her a couple hundred yards, even, he's probably going to smell her. But I think one thing that they do,
checking those cross trails too.
It's like they're tracking.
Yeah.
And they can cover, if you think about it, think about how much more ground you can cover just by walking a transition and smelling who went into every trail. Right. And it seems like that's where those scrapes pop up. So, like, if you've got that 200-yard section and maybe there's, in the middle of it, there's a spot where 3 heavily used trails come out where the does are going in and out, almost every day, bed to food, and there's bang, 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 3 scrapes, especially if they're all within bow range or whatever your weapon of that time of the year is, and you can shoot all those. Like, those are the types of places that I think you have a really good chance at catching a cruising buck as early as, starting here in, really now, right? Yeah. I mean, even in September, like, those are concentration areas for sure.
Yeah, I think you're looking at, like, September, those seasons that come in there, like, you're spending more of the time trying to find the deer that's hitting that. Like, that's his little spot. Like, he's probably not going and moving around, but, like, it's more of like a guessing game or trying to, cast a wide net to find, like, hey, this is the one he's hitting, and then figuring out how to hunt it. But, like, for a mock scrape, like, trying to set that up because you have the control, right? When you find that and it's a huntable spot, setting it up so you can hunt it, because it's easy to just be like, this makes sense, but I can't hunt here. Like, there's no way I'm going to get away with hunting here. Right. Like where Brett shot his buck, that was like the ideal, situation of a spot that he can. It's also the same thing as, like, if you have everyone talks about, like, those cold fronts in October, and, like, so if you have that weather, that's sweet, but, like, that deer was hitting that scrape a bunch. You want to make sure that it's similar to, like, a food plot, that you can get in and out, in and out, in and out, and not blow everything up. So you're almost hunting it like a food plot. I think is the best way, especially early. Yeah. Just because it's not a cold front doesn't mean that he's not going to come hit it. You just have to be, like, particular about where you're putting them.
Yeah.
Here's something I want to hear your guys' opinions on.
Yeah.
So, in general,
it's not normal.
In general, scrapes are on transition lines, pinches, funnels. What makes a community scrape and not, like, one of those rut scrapes that he just does on November 1st when he's cruising? What makes that one not a community scrape and the community scrape a community scrape, if that makes sense?
I guess my thought is kind of like what I was saying earlier, where there's just a heavy congregation of trails.
Yeah.
Where they feel like almost obligated to stop and
In open country, I feel like you can learn a lot about them quickly. They're almost a lot of times under like a tree that'll be a beacon tree.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we're coming out of a thicket on a deer trail,
Right.
and it's starting to angle towards that one pin oak tree out in the middle of the marsh.
Mm-hmm.
And you start following that, and then all of a sudden you start seeing these other trails kind of converging, and all of a sudden you get to that tree, and it's like there's just trails coming in from every direction.
And like in our situation, that would be like, you know, on a logging road with a overhanging beech branch. That's just like it's sticking out, like it's something that is obvious, like your beacon tree or
See
like
it from
a
100 yards.
like a big hemlock.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's where I've seen a lot of big community scrapes. And
Yep.
and your guys' neck of the woods is like, if you're following trails through pretty open hardwoods timber, and then all of a sudden you hit a different type of tree that's like, it's the same thing. It's like a visual cue, because even down south I've seen them in high concentrations under holly trees. You know, those leaves stay green all year, and it's the same thing. It's almost like a visual cue. And back to what you were saying about making your mock scrape really big, it's almost like just something that they see, like, oh, I'll go over that direction. And somehow, and I think too, just over the years, like those trails get worn in so much that, you know, it just becomes like a habit.
So there's other factors with community scrapes than just like a transition line.
I think
You'll see a
so.
big old
I think a
branch
lot of
hanging
it too
200
is
yards away.
like in steeper country like us, like you get those like logging roads are huge. You get that flat, like they're not gonna like want to be on the side of a mountain, you know,
Right.
like, but if you have, you know, like a trail like that and you get like a little whoop,
Yep.
nice and flat,
Bench.
you know, like a little bench of some sort, which, you know, like a logging road, like that's, and you can walk those logging roads and you'll have like that big one, and then like November or whatever, end of October, it's like there's just like 30 of them, but like 10 yards to the right and 10 yards to the left, there ain't nothing.
Yeah.
It's just
Right on that line.
Right.
The one thing, too, about a big community scrape, I guess, is that a lot of times there's just something about them that has, it allows you to believe that the signs are telling you more than one buck's hitting it very consistently. So like year in and year out, if bucks are using the same licking branch, it's like further up. So when you go out on the end of a branch, it's real spindly out there. But as the years go on and they just keep rubbing that thing, when you hit a licking branch that's like as thick as these tripod legs,
Good sign.
right.
and it's kind of broken off the end,
Right.
they're all peeled up,
Yeah.
and then maybe better yet, there's 3 of those around the tree, and there's 3 big, you know, dirt spots under the tree. That's when I'm like, man, this isn't just one buck hitting this one time. It's a buck hitting this, or multiple bucks, and maybe even multiple mature bucks. And it seems that when multiple mature bucks hit a scrape, they become more and more aggressive. So like they're standing there making themselves mad, like
Making the scrape bigger.
dude, y'all were in here. We lost our life. It's like, y'all were in here yesterday. I'm pissed, you know. And just, I think that.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, the
Pretty
licking
telling.
branches. Yeah, like you said, just multiple years of branches nipped off or whatever it is.
And then the fresh rut scrape, you'll just see like a brand new beech branch just
Yeah, and
bit in half.
there's probably if anything,
Yeah, if
you know,
anything.
he may have just stuck his face up in it, and
Yeah.
you know. But the other thing to think about too is like, you know, when you're looking for these in September and stuff, most likely the ground isn't worked up. Like a lot of those deer they're not pawing at the ground. They're just, you know, sticking their face up and into the licking branches. But you can see, even if you have like leaf matter or whatever, you can usually see those spots that were probably opened up and a lot of dirt. There's always like a bunch of real young, fresh green grass growing.
Yep.
Or like, you know, whatever it is. It's like real small, and you'll look around and there's none of that. But then in this spot, because they opened up the dirt in the fall, there's all this like real fresh growth coming back up.
Yeah, I've found going on that sometimes they might not even bite the branches or whatever and just rub their face in it. I found what looked like a scrape multiple times. Looks like a scrape, but only the branches tell you that it's a scrape.
Right.
And you run a camera
Right.
there all summer, and they're not even looking at the ground. They just walk by.
Yeah,
it.
they just stick their face up in it.
Yeah. And then
I think they use licking branches all year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Just like a scrape.
Bucks and does.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I think a lot of times does don't even scrape.
No,
They just walk in and put
their face up in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
It's not even just deer. Like the amount of pictures of other animals that I get in scrapes is crazy. Coyotes, absolutely, and foxes absolutely love them.
Mm-hmm.
We have fishers. It's like every scrape, there's a fisher in there. Like, so it's just like, in general, just like a, you know, it's a bar.
funnel. Well,
it's a
yeah.
bar,
And it's like
for
a
the whole town to you know, like it's a
Come and sniff
community
around.
spot. Yeah, like,
Well, I think it tells you a lot too about
and yeah, funnel, like,
funnel, beacon, like
Yeah.
whatever it may be. I think when you're talking wild animals, even ourselves, right? When you're walking through the woods, why do you stumble on a scrape? It's because somehow
something's funneling
you're
you.
funneling down to that spot.
Yep.
I mean, whether you realize it's happening
when
or
they
not.
were looking for Cody's buck, there was what, 8 of you guys,
Yeah.
and they all spread out, and they didn't talk to each other, and every single one of them ended up at the same exact spot.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just
naturally.
walking.
And there
you
was
know?
a big signpost right there, like 10 yards from where we met up.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
just like-
pretty telling, right?
Something, whatever it is pushing us to this spot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that really, when you think about what a scrape means, to me, it just is a communication thing. Like, hey, I'm here today. I'm not here today. So if they're giving you that clue as a hunter, we talk about fresh sign all the time. Well, if you see the fresh sign telling you that he's in there, it's a pretty dang good indicator that you need to like start thinking about what your next move
Right.
is a little bit more seriously.
Yeah.
And that's where even those singular scrapes going back into a
Especially
bedding
as like
area.
a still hunter too, when you start to find those real, like, I think like the buck Bailey killed last year.
Yeah.
It was like, this is like
today.
and then boom, boom, boom. I mean, that's not how he killed him, but like that's like a super like confidence booster type thing if you're like still hunting with a gun or even a bow. Like
Yeah.
you're not getting anything, because you can look at a rub and go, oh, like that's fresh, but okay, the stuff's on top of the leaves. Was it today? Yeah, I mean, okay, you can see some that are like still like wet, you know, but like a scrape, it's like, okay, like that's like fresh. And then you can also,
They're track catchers.
Yep.
yeah,
They literally are.
and you
the
can look at the
definition
track and
of
then
it.
have, you know, somewhat of an idea of like, what
this who we
is
after
this?
or
Yeah,
not?
is this
Yeah.
is this him?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's been a lot of situations because I don't run trail cameras, and that's something that I like to do mostly to compare to. Like, there's that way you have like two different examples depending on what boat you're in. Like, if you're a trail camera runner, then you can hear what you're doing. If you're not, then you can hear what I'm doing, right? Like, to have two different comparisons in the strategy. And like when I'm looking at a scrape, I have to just make a guess based off these clues what type of buck we're dealing with here. Like, is this big buck? Where are his tines,
Yeah,
reaching
how
to?
high up is, yeah.
Yep, if he's making rubs beside it, what are those telling us? Are they, are you able to see tine marks on the tree behind it? Well, then that's telling you how long his tines are. I mean, little things like that. I'm not saying I'm out here
Right.
like trying to field score a deer, but you can tell a lot of times if this is a more mature buck or if this is just something that, Dinkneck made goofing off on his way back to bed this morning. Like, he doesn't even really know what he's doing yet. Where when you hit that big buck scrape that's aggressively hit a lot of times, stuff will be thrown way back.
Yeah.
It's almost obvious. Like, okay, this isn't
Big
Dinkneck.
stamp. If they're able to get up on their hind legs and they're taking out down a branch that's way up there, like, I mean, these are things that you're like, I don't think that's just
He's
little
at
Bubby
le-
doing
He's
that.
at least tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's long.
Yeah. And I just think that being able to differentiate those things, like, cameras are confirmation of that, but at a certain point too, like, even as somebody that runs a trail camera, I'm sure there's times where you hit a scrape, you're like, big boy's gonna show on
Right.
this one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's just all those signs that are saying, like, hey, this is worth keeping an eye on. And I just think that sometimes too the annual ones are real crazy, because I've had a couple examples over the years where I found these scrapes once, maybe in turkey season, and then I go back again in the summer, and then there's a scrape there again, and then you go there in the fall and it's like, whoa, that's blown up, but maybe you don't even hunt there. But then the next year during turkey season, there it is again.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start finding those places, it's worth lingering around those, in my opinion. Like, especially in my hunting style of like being extremely mobile. Why not just make that a starting point?
Right.
And then from there, you can continue to fan
Right.
and try to get more specific. But like, we're talking car hood. You know, everybody's heard that, man. Car hood scrape. But when you find those, dude, like, there's those. One great example is that buck right there. That was that same season I was just telling the story where the raccoon tried to get into our canoe.
Oh, yeah.
Like that buck was right on a transition line where the year before, if it's not him, it's darn similar shaped rack. A buck was rubbing and scraping the heck out of that transition. Is exactly the same transition line, exactly the same spot as where I shot that buck the year after.
Right.
So like when I got in there with Logan that day and we saw a big rub on the same tree that we did the year before that was fresh, we didn't even have to see the scrapes. It's like, they're on that transition,
right.
just up there on that, edge of our bow range at 30, 35 yards.
And the cool thing with like the trail camera stuff is you get that like exact, like you can see like, okay, like this buck shows up here on this scrape October 15th and he did it. It's like a sign, almost like a signpost. He did it the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Where like that's like a mental type thing, but it's like cool to see like the
data.
The date.
Well,
yeah,
it allows you to much better backtrack the specifics, because here's an example that's on the other end of the spectrum, and this is something I should probably try to do a better job of referencing, are these unsuccessful scrape setups or unsuccessful situations where it's like everything looks good, but it doesn't end up panning out ever.
Yeah.
So Keith and I were hunting last season in a spot where there's a bunch of cattails and there was a kind of like an alder buffer between the cattails and the CRP grass. And then there was an ag field out there. Well, it was so tight to these cattails and there were so many freaking trails going straight in and out of the cattails, like I guess perpendicular to the transition. And then we just found like right off the road, we're scrape after scrape after scrape to finally it's like you hit this one where it's the same deal. There's all these licking branches. There's multiple scrapes around a tree. We can set up in a brushy patch right here, 15 yards from it. So we did. Nothing. Next morning, went in there and set up on it again. Nothing. Hunted there, I think, one more time. Nothing. And it's just like...
I feel like that happens to a lot of people.
And the reason that I bring that up is if that's happening, keep her moving then. Like there's probably something that's making them not get there till dark.
Right.
Maybe they're just bedding further back in there than you anticipated. If that's the case, then keep moving. Like, don't just keep hunting there.
Because it's a cool looking scrape.
Right. I mean,
or
more
put it in the
breadcrumbs
back of your mind and say, okay, maybe this is something that I should sit with the right weather conditions and not just sit it continuously. But like, maybe this is something that would make a lot of sense when it's, a cold front in October.
I mean, and the thing was that was like real late October. Those puppies were smoked. They were smoked this morning. I mean, I think both Keith and I were like, we're going to see something. Like, we're going to at least see a younger buck come through here, and we never did.
Right.
And I just think that in hindsight, it's like they were probably significantly deeper into that piece, but at the same time, when you see something that fresh, and you can also suspect that they're bedding in the middle of those cattails, and heck, maybe they were, dude. Maybe they just weren't leaving the cattails until after dark too. But I do want to, I guess, put that out there.
It's not foolproof.
Right. Trust me, there's
nothing.
way more times that I've set up on a scrape and not seen that
for sure.
thing than killed a buck on them.
A lot of the times there's more breadcrumbs
Right.
to fall
Right.
that you can get a little closer.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, like outside of the scrape is like using it as just like you were kind of saying, like you may not be able to kill that buck right there, but using it as like, okay, I can probably kill him in this pinch outside of this or this funnel right here. Like that's exactly like kind of like the buck that we've been after back home is like, I know he's smoking the scrape, but it's like an hour or whatever after dark, and it's like, okay, well, where can I kill you somewhere else? Like I want to kill you over the scrape because it'll be cool, but like I just want to kill you. Where else could you go? So you can use it too as just like you said, like a diagram of like pinpointing, like, I know he was here, or there was this here, this here, this here. How's he moving through this area? Where can I? And you do that a lot too with like your mock scrapes, maybe where the scrape should be is not huntable, but maybe that, pinch 200 yards away is
where you
huntable.
make the mock scrape.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think of a really simple setup situation where, let's say, like in your guys' neck of the woods, or a lot of stuff I hunt back east is just, you got a finger ridge that's maybe kind of got like a flat knob spot on the end. And let's just say, luckily, there's some blowdowns there too. So there's this visual block. And maybe because of that, it's a little thicker, some down trees. And in the off season, you found some real worn in beds there. If you follow that finger up to the main ridge, maybe up on the top, there's rubs and scrapes everywhere, but it's 350 yards to the top. Maybe by checking that scrape, whether that be through your cameras or you're on the boots on the ground scouting, you see that, okay, he's hitting that. But because of that bedding area that you found down the ridge, you've now got 2 points of interest. So cutting the distance in between, you could stage hunt your way back. So maybe day one, you set up on the scrape, or like you said, with better weather conditions. But then the second time, maybe you go get in kind of like a little saddle between the main ridge and the fingered knob that the buck is bedding on, and maybe that just increases your odds. Where he's almost going there like a destination, you're just intercepting him in between.
That's what we're gonna have to do, John.
That's
on that
kind of
buck.
what that's like our kind of plan.
Yeah,
so we started safe, and now it's like, okay, boom, let's try here. Because I have an idea of that area in general, just because I've missed a bunch of bucks there in the past. It's a nice starting. I think the cool thing is too, it's a good starting point, and like you said, you have confidence in it because it's there. It's like
he's telling you I'm here.
Yeah,
right?
it's, even if he's not there in daylight, you feel. I don't think I've ever hunted a scrape and like not felt like
a little
good.
like butterflies. And
right,
this
like
might
fresh
happen.
enough.
this could
Yeah.
be cool. Like this is a chance. It's a good chance instead of just like hunting somewhere, where your confidence can get lower. Like it's a visual thing to let you know, especially without a camera. Like, hey, he was here. Like there's a
Right.
buck here.
And a lot of times too, like we were talking about, there's a track catcher there with the dirt spot, and if you just see a big stamp or even just a wide scrape mark from the hoof itself, like that's a pretty good indicator. Like if you're looking at multiple buck markings in there, if one's real wide, that's usually a pretty good feeling for
Indiana, I mean, that's how we keyed in
yeah.
on all that spot in Indiana that killed that buck.
Scrapes.
Was all scrapes and looking at the tracks in them. I mean, that's a perfect example of like how you would hunt. I mean, we ended up hunting across from that, but like that gave us the clue of like, hey, and it was basically all track. Like, there's a good buck in here because it's in the scrapes.
It's a perfect example of like what you just described with that finger ridge. We found those scrapes on that knob. Remember when we were hunting on the ground and the really mature one came in?
Yep.
It was like 75 yards from that knob that those huge scrapes were on.
Yeah.
But we weren't on the scrape. We were just off it. And they were cruising right through there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's like the mixture of everything that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Didn't kill him on a scrape, but all the scrapes
led us to that. To know that there was a good buck in that area and we need to spend some time in there, and then found the huntable. Well, I mean, we hunted just below that the first night, and I almost shot. I mean, he wasn't a big. I mean, he was he was a younger deer, but like we almost shot one the first night, like from that, or the second night from that intel. But I remember the first spot we hunted. I specifically remember finding that scrape where we pinned that we wanted to get to, looking in that scrape and going, that's a big that's a big one.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think.
And then we saw like 26 bucks.
Yeah.
It was nuts.
Well, but I think there's one consistency to the stories that I think of, whether they're my own or my buddies, just like your guys' Indiana one. The one thing that's consistent about all the stories that we're referring to is people were covering ground in season. I don't think, we're talking about finding scrapes like in turkey season and these annual scrapes, but that's not limited to that time either, where if you know where those are, they're worth going and checking, but they may not be hot. And if they're not hot, just because you've seen them there for 3 years straight does not mean you should be parking it there and not doing anything else.
Right.
Because let's say you just have a weekend to hunt and you park it on a scrape that's not just completely on fire. It is my personal opinion that you are way better off cutting your losses and continuing to move through the woods to where you're going to set yourself up better for next weekend versus just forcing
Being
it.
stuck. Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it. If you hunt 2 days on an inactive scrape, or one that they're not hitting very much, and you end up investing 2 days, 2 of your 2 days, or 1.5 of your days that you have to hunt for that week into that spot. What do you know for next week?
Right.
Nothing.
Exactly.
I mean,
That's
you're
great.
almost backwards. You're like
Yeah.
almost in worse shape. So you'd be better off, in my opinion, to just keep covering ground and just looking for those places that are hot. I mean, essentially trying to get out of the habit of just setting up in a spot just because that's a spot you've set up in the past.
I've noticed the weekend hunters that I'm around, they'll do that a lot. They'll
Yeah.
just like be scared to keep going just
Yeah.
for whatever reason and they'll sit on that not super hot scrape just because I don't really know why, but
I feel like it's this concern that you're not actually hunting, therefore you're not in the game. But if you practice the art of the still hunt scout mix, you can still be hunting, and you also are likely setting yourself up better for the future.
Yes.
Like knowing that it's like an investment in land, for example. If you invest in land, yeah, it's going to take a lot of your savings up, right? Or all of them. But down the road, once you pay that land off, then you get the return on it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with scouting in season, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yep.
It's like, yes, you maybe your odds of shooting a buck go down if you're more on the move, or at least your confidence is down. But maybe you also stumble on Sunday afternoon, you stumble on that hot spot where you're going to see 26 bucks
Yeah.
next weekend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that, to me, that's just something that I feel like if you can tap into that mentality, especially with something like scrapes in late October, you're going to bump up your odds.
I think the other thing is people are so terrified of just spooking deer.
Right.
We've talked
Big
about
time.
this
Yeah.
a lot.
big time.
But how many deer did we spook when we were in Indiana?
More than we saw.
A lot. I mean, we hunted a spot back home just last week, and similar situation. Like it's a new spot. I had ran some cameras in there, and we had, it was windy. We had rain come through. I'm like, let's just go still hunt, scout, and work our way through there. And we bumped a lot of deer. And we set up. We ended up finding like this little pocket where there's, oaks dropping, there's hickories dropping, there's beech nuts dropping, and there's like 5 or 6 like fresh rubs. And this is like 20 yards from where we just spooked the last deer. And we sat there and we saw 6 deer. There's deer blowing all over the place 2 hours later, or 2 hours before we saw it. And it's just like, and I ended up throwing a camera up there, and there's a piss load of deer in there. Like they're just like there all day.
Yeah.
And that's on public ground too, where other people are hunting. So like, think about that on a private aspect. My buddy just had a hunt that he went and got permission on a new piece, and he called me and he's like, it was right on the backside of a field, and he's like, I bumped a really big buck. And I was like, just go back in there. Like, he's probably going to come back. He's like, I don't know. I bumped him hard. And I'm like, yeah, but like you didn't like rip a rifle round over his
Right,
back. Like it's
yeah.
right off the backside of a field. He's used to probably farmers and equipment. He probably gets bumped all the time. He went back in a couple days later. That buck came in 5 minutes into a sit. He didn't end up shooting him because he busted him, but he like was right there. Yeah. And like, that's a mature old deer.
Yeah. I think that it's just we find the spot and then we want to treat it so delicate. But at the end of the day, if they really like that spot, there's generally something there that's got them locked into that spot. And a lot of times it's the current food source. So I think even what happens at times is people feel that they bumped them off, but they actually just didn't hunt it aggressively enough. Too much time went by and the deer just shifted naturally
Right.
anyway.
Yeah. Right.
Like, for example, that one year that we ended up shooting that buck with the gun in 2020, Ben and I. That year, I've never seen anything as consistent as those scarlet oaks were dropping acorns like crazy. Everywhere that we went where there was a patch of scarlet oaks, there would be so much feeding sign under them. Mm-hmm. It was like you couldn't miss it. And since then, it's not been the case. But like that season, you couldn't do anything wrong with one of those spots. Mm-hmm. They were going to keep hitting it because that's where the plethora of food was. Like everywhere else in the timber, they were not getting what they were getting under those trees.
Right.
You could keep kicking them off. I bet you could have kicked them off several times before they even thought about shifting.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's going to be every single situation, but like you shouldn't, in my opinion, at least, you should not be so afraid to spook something that you just never keep investigating or you never keep looking. Like if you bump one, that's kind of a good thing.
You know he's there.
Yeah,
it's
you
like
know he's there.
It's like tracking.
Yeah.
Like you almost want to bump him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, that buck, that was a gun hunt. And we ended up being able to, like, who knows, I didn't let him get this close, but who knows, I might have been able to shoot him with the bow. He was 40 yards away. There's too much brush for a bow, but darn near could have shot him with the bow.
Well, even
bumped him, and he circled around.
Your Ohio gun buck. Like, you bumped that deer.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about Iowa.
Nope,
okay.
Nope, that's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, it gave you the information to know where you thought he was going to go to, too. Yeah,
that hunt taught me so much. And that same year, Warb did it in October with a bow, just a different day, but it was a bump and dump situation where he bumped a buck.
That was the one he got down out of the stand? Yeah.
And that's like those two hunts in the same season are just such unbelievable examples of just sticking with it and not just, throwing in the towel. And I just feel like, bumping stuff is not that big of a deal.
On the opposite side of it, I definitely get why weekend hunters are scared of it.
Yeah.
Because, like, I only have so much time.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to spook. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know where they're coming from, but I think if those guys think about it differently, they could.
Yeah, it's just the investment idea. I think if you can think of it that way, that it really helps me. Because the hunting that I do is all short trips, right? Like 1 week. Like I rarely go. Well, I don't have a home place to hunt deer out the backyard anymore or in the back door. Every time I go deer hunting,
travel.
It's very different situation. And I think that when that's the case, you could think of it the same way. Well, I got this time crunch, and the time's always shrinking on me. The hourglass is always losing the sand in it. And then if you get too caught up in that and you start forcing it on day 1, 2, 3, 4, like you may not be setting yourself up that well for day 5, 6, 7. Mm-hmm. And I just think that, like, whether you're on a weekend hunt, a 3-day weekend hunt, a week-long vacation, a week-long trip, whatever you want to call it, just thinking of that time on foot as an investment for setting yourself up later in the hunt is extremely valuable.
Help a lot, yeah.
There's a long even a 7-day hunt is a marathon. Like, you're probably not just going to sprint out of the gate and win. Sometimes, but not very often.
Like we're about to do. When we
Right.
Good thing it's only 5 because I can't do a marathon, I don't think.
So I guess one last thing I kind of want to touch on, because I feel like this is something that we at times get questions about, is the idea of setting up on scrapes. Like, how exactly, and maybe this is somewhat, mostly touching on this for somebody that's new to mobile setups and how to set up on the actual scrape itself. So, like, what is the progression of things that you guys do when you find a scrape that you're like, this is probably something I want to either hang in today or in 3 days? What are some of the, like, steps that you take?
Go ahead, John.
Like, as far as, like, how we're going to hunt it?
Like, anything from visualizing him coming in,
right,
to your setup, to
I think
your access.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, you want to kind of use, if you don't know for sure, use your judgment of where you think he's bedding to determine your access. The other thing, it's kind of like cookie cutter, but your wind too. I think one thing that I'll use, like, this year as an example, that I feel like I can might do differently here on out is, especially where I hunt, like my best wind is going to be the last hour. And before that, it's just a stress mess because it's just like in those hills and stuff. It just is.
It's messed up.
I don't like it. Like, so like
Nobody.
Ideal.
So here, one thing though. Nobody likes it. I think that because like you see
the
you
deer
see-
like it.
right? Well, and you see like a hunting show in Iowa, and they're like, we got a straight west wind, and then they never worry about anything.
Right.
And if that's been your only experience, it's like you go hunt hills and you're gonna learn a lot real quick about. It's not even reading the wind on your weather app.
No.
It's about that. And then pairing that with anticipation of how thermals are going to pull in areas. So,
Right. Yeah.
to your point,
So, yeah.
figuring that out.
So, say you're
I'm going to check this camera, but keep talking.
You're in one of those spots where you think that scrape is super close to his bedding area. Well, you probably better not get in there when that wind's being weird.
Yeah.
Because if he's right there and your wind does...
One little swirl.
I mean, yeah, you have... Say, I don't think I've had a hunt where I can say I've had a consistent west wind. We don't usually leave stuff in the woods, so that makes it a little tougher. But like if I had a spot set up, like I would want to be there the last hour. Like when I know that wind is it's not like the rut, right? Where you may have you obviously want a consistent wind, but you can get away with a lot more. Like if it's being weird, you can get away with it. Where like this is like that's your play, and that buck's probably right in that general area. And I'm talking like more early, like early October, like what we're just coming out of. Like he's probably not very far, and if he's up before sunset, he's probably standing below, if he can be like he's standing below that scrape, just standing there.
Yes.
He's not like just getting up, stretching, and just like
I'm going to walk right
Yeah,
to
so I think in our situation, the wind is huge. Like making sure you're there. It may be a short hunt, but if you can slip in quietly, and maybe for future-wise, maybe that means that if we should be doing more of a ground setup. I do like to try to get in trees, especially around me, because I can see so far if I can. So yeah, I'd say that's the biggest thing. Like, you don't need to sit there for 4 hours. Maybe it's just the last hour, and I think that's something that we've maybe not done the best of because worry about setting up, and it's like, oh well, if I make a decent amount of noise, I want it to calm down. But every time that we've done that, I just sit up there and I'm pissed off because I'm like, oh,
the wind.
Yeah. And I just like where I think he's bedding, it hasn't gone yet that I know of, but like, it's just like, and then the last hour, it's just like this is perfect.
Now you're getting a thermal pull down or whatever.
It is. If it's super windy, it kind of settles. And like now I'm getting that consistent. Cause like where we just hunted last time, I was like, we had a pretty stiff wind. And I was like, it's usually fairly consistent up high because we were up high, and it wasn't. But that last hour, once it was like the gusty stuff kind of laid down, then it was like, okay, this is what we want. It's not doing that, washing machine type deal. And then like, I keep going back because it's just fresh. The morning stuff too is like, I was telling you about that deer. It's like, I send that picture to people and they're like, why is he on his feet at 10 a.m.? It's 80 degrees and he's walking through that spot and like, go kill him. And it's like, well,
he's doing it because that's when the wind's
because
in
that's
his favor.
exactly when the sun comes up and our thermals go completely
haywire.
Different. It's just completely different. And that's when he can come up into that area and know he's good. And we can't be there. Mm-hmm. We can be there, but we're not going to kill him.
Right. Or you'd have to just continue to go. I think you can be there. You just have to study it a lot for a while.
Right.
Like you'd have to study it, for a whole morning or a whole, maybe go up in there after the season and study it. And I think that's something that we've talked about thermals a fair amount here and there. And I mean, I've done specific podcasts about thermals, and with like I did one with Jeff Sturgis once, and that's super valuable. So if you haven't heard that, you're listening to this, you're like, I don't understand thermals. Go listen to something like that, and just keep experimenting and pay attention to the little details as much as you can. Like constantly be dropping milkweed or dropping dirt even, and just seeing where it's going, because you can learn about them, and I feel like you can manipulate them in your favor. It just is a lot of practice, and I'm still not as good as I want to be at it, but I'm getting better and I'm getting more confident. You know what really helps? Hunting whitetails in hills and then hunting elk in mountains is just really beneficial to your ability to read wind. And that even goes for, like, I was just hunting mule deer in the plains with Greg, and there were times there that I was seeing consistencies with how thermals were working. Like, yeah, if you're on the top or if you're down on the flat plains, yeah, the predominant wind is just blasting in your face, baby. It's great. But then if you get on that hillside, it's like that predominant wind starts to be influenced by a thermal pull up. So like if you're on a hillside, maybe the wind on the very tip top's coming this way, but as soon as you drop onto the hillside, it might be doing more of this. But if you see that time in and time, day in and day out throughout a long period of time, you start to just be able to anticipate. And that's what I think reading thermals is. You're just almost anticipating. You're guessing. You're like, well, sun's hitting there. Predominant wind should be coming this way, so then it's going to react this way. Now, granted, that may not be consistent with super gusty, calm, but if you have some tendency that you can play, you may be able to take some sort of risk, knowing, well, at least 75% of the time I'm getting a pretty good win. And I think you have to commit to that too if you're hunting in hill country.
And
like
I think
you can't be like, this is perfect.
Yeah. I think a lot of it too is like relating, compared to, like I was saying, like early season, where you're probably in there, after a buck that's probably right there, compared to like obviously in the rut I think about the wind, but like if it goes like that, whatever, that buck could be a mile and a half away right now. Like I'm hunting more like movement of where can I intercept multiple deer, not one deer hitting a scrape the last 10 minutes of light. That's probably right in that bubble.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that's kind of like my thought process on an earlier season setup there. If you want to set up a mock scrape, setting it up to where you can hunt it, consistently, or looking for that cold front spike in pressure, that type of stuff is all more stuff that I would look for early in the year.
Looking for setup stuff, something that I was thinking about. We use the example of a bench, right? So bench scrapes are sweet. Tricky because of that wind thing, but let's say you decide that, well, I'm going to hunt this on an evening, and I'm going to hunt on the low slope below the scrape, and hoping that I'm going to get a thermal drop on a calmer evening. The next thing is like, okay, how can I access this without things seeing me? If I'm going to come in here in the evening, we're going to be dealing with daylight that they might just look up there and see me, right? So a lot of times I'm looking for something that I can sneak through to where I'm below it, or got vegetation on either side of me. But one of my favorite things in a hill country situation on a bench scrape is taking up just a tiny little ditch where maybe your hips are really covered by the dirt, but if you need to, you can sink down into it and use it as cover, and then slide up. And whether you're a ground guy or a tree stand or saddle guy, like before you leave that scrape, picking out spots that you could potentially set up, and maybe better yet, like I just did this spring, for example, when I was scouting. I found this spot that I really liked. This scrape, I had actually found a shed in a bed on the end of a ridge, and just out of that bedding area, right on the transition to where it met up with a bunch of oaks, there was just a hammered scrape. Like, I mean, boys, we're talking 70 yards tops from this bed where I found a really nice 5-point shed.
Right.
And I was like, man, how would you get in here? And I was looking at it, and it was going to be a heck of a walk. Like, there was a much faster walk from the road, but I would come in kind of the back door, circle all the way around, get the wind in my favor, take this little ditch up that got me right to the base of one of those big oak trees where that scrape was, and there was just a bunch of junk under that tree, like kind of old down trees underneath of it. So I just kind of stacked that up, set that up in a position to where, like, if I come back there, I know exactly where I'm going to go slide into. And maybe my impatient butt's going to get up and start walking around still hunting in the bedding area in a half hour. But at least I know that's the spot I'm going right to.
Right.
And same thing with the tree setup. Like picking the tree, maybe if you got your stand and saddle on your back, you go up there, read the wind once.
Right.
Like those little factors, I think, are really beneficial if you know exactly that spot that you're hoping they come down. And also looking at, you know, their entry and exit trails to those scrapes. Like the reason I like a bench trail is usually those trails go like this on that bench. They rarely go underneath and come up the steep stuff, and that's where you use that to put your ground scent there.
Right.
You're hiding in a visual standpoint. I really like those types.
You just
of
go
spots.
slow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any little ditch or creek or whatever.
Yeah, you know, like where we hunt, even like, you know, like a thicker brush, like the one spot, like that's exactly what it is. It's not a very big, and they love to be right in there, but it's enough that I can slide around the backside. He's not in there. He's in that steep.
Yeah.
Like there's probably does and stuff in there, but he's way up looking. Like I think around where I hunt a lot more, they're bedding more with a visual than anything else when it's super steep.
Yep.
Like just on a little, you know, bench. Like
maybe where a tree fell on that steep and they're like laying in the
So I'm trying to stay as low as I can to get to, you know, a ditch or like a, you know, a thicker spot that I can just slowly, because I mean, even if your wind's good and there's deer in there, if you move up through that slow enough to get to the tree,
they don't know.
Like, what are you? You know,
just another deer or a bear or a coyote.
Right. There's enough crap in the woods that makes noise, as long as your noise is somewhat similar to that noise. It's
and the animals. I mean, a quick tip to that is animals stop often. Like, they're playing defense, right? Like most animals, maybe not as much a bear, but even a bear, like if you watch animals move through the woods, they stop and listen all the time. So if you match that, you're probably getting away with more than what you think.
Right. And they break big sticks, and then they sit there and they stop.
Yeah.
And they listen. So like,
you know, it's fascinating. We do this, but I've noticed over the years with the still hunting, just like being in bedding areas and being real tight with stuff, just ultra aggressive things. Something that I've noticed is a big buck especially will wait until the wind blows to move also. And like that's kind of spooky. It's like it's like he's the one with the experience. Like he knows how to play this game better than we even do. And if he's doing that, then we should absolutely be doing the same thing. Like I've been in a bedding area with a deer before and like heard a stick break and it's pretty calm. Then all of a sudden that gust of wind happens and that's when he starts making his move, and it makes it way harder to like keep a tab on
and
him.
He knows that.
And but that's why he's doing it, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's sweet. I think that tells you a lot about like how much of a advantage they have, just because that's how they live their life every day. We're visitors temporarily.
Well, I mean, think about what you would do if you heard something in your house.
Oh yeah.
You listen, and you're like, oh, all right, it was just the wind.
If somebody comes barging in the front door, you're gonna know it. But like thinking about like how I used to walk to a tree stand when I was a kid, leave the truck and just walk her there.
What's
baby?
the quickest way to just like put your head down?
Man, I can't wait to sit down.
I can't kill one till I'm there. I might as well get there.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think if you just slow her down a little bit, be patient, take your time, and like you said too about the scrapes, I think of this in a lot of October hunting, especially in the hills. Don't be afraid for it to just be 45 minutes. Even I mean, on your way there, you could run into something. You could call one in. You could whatever. Like you're hunting, putting yourself in the mentality of you're hunting from the time you start getting into the danger zone until you're in your setup. I mean, it's a great strategy to use. And I mean, I think one advantage that I say this, and I know this has become easier for me just because I'm always on the move. Like I'm never uncomfortable, I suppose. Like there are times, I shouldn't say never, but most of the time I'm like comfortable in wherever position I'm in. But if you've never done that and you've only, had success out of setups, I think it could be a little bit harder to dive into. But just knowing that at any point, if you hear one coming, he's telling you where you need to get ready for. So, like, if you listen often, you're going to up your odds of, like,
Right.
you know, being ready for that.
You're going to hear him before you see him most of the
Right.
time.
And truthfully, if one hears you and he thinks you're a deer,
he's probably coming right at you.
he's going to come at you. And if you know where that's at and you can get drawn ahead of time, like, yeah, he might stop out and give you 3 seconds before he runs. But if you're already drawn and put your pin on him at 15 yards,
Done.
Yeah.
son.
Send one right over his back.
Yeah. I guess one last thing with the setup thing is, like, if I have any ability to do it, if I'm in a tree or on the ground, whatever's off my left shoulder, like my most natural spot to draw easily with minimal movement,
That's
that's where I'm going to get him. If he comes down this trail, ideally I pick and, you know, even just like break or push things over to be able to shoot multiple lanes on the trail, but knowing that ultimately, if all of a sudden I'm sitting here dinking around looking at on X, I got no confidence in the setup anymore, and all of a sudden I hear pop, and I look up and he's like already on his way. If I've already got my bow facing there, my arrows facing there, my body's oriented that way, this is all the movement that I should need.
Yeah.
And I think setting up that way is important.
So, yeah, that's a good point too. As far as like we have a lot of just wide open stuff. Is going back to him probably standing there, surveying the scene. You know, if you're in a saddle, going like this, and like having, you know, if you're in a tree or whatever, having, you know, good cover in general. But like I think our setup the other day was like about as min as you can get. So like you've got a scrape right here, right? There's a maple tree and there's a pine right behind the maple tree. There's a logging road like this. This is kind of like open. We're expecting him to come up like this right here. So our wind is supposed to be doing this, but it's kind of doing this and like this, but it's not going like that. So like we felt like, okay. So I was in a saddle and I was like 45 with my bow facing the scrape, but literally all I had to do, I wasn't going to let him get to the scrape. Like I was going to have to shoot him before, but I could grab my bow, draw, and shoot his entire, what I thought was going to be his entire entrance into the scrape. And just, like you said, very just grab, pull, boom. Like that's my easiest shot is spinning to my left. Yeah. But if he, you know, for some reason pops up on the scrape, it's just like, I think I even said it in the video. I'm just like, ooh, that's like plug and play. Like, cause it was like, I'm just like, doink, like type deal. But, and the other thing with the setup that just from talking about this, that I think for like our situation, we're doing a lot of hanging hunts. And like I was saying, I struggle with that early thing is maybe it is something where we do get in early, we slide and get everything set and literally get out and get back up onto like our entrance where the safe win is, and then slide back in.
Yeah, I don't think that would actually be a sweet approach because if it worked, it would teach everybody a ton of stuff, right?
Right, because like where we were, that would be perfect because it's just like it's a wide, like there's not deer, like we walk through a wide open cut, like there's not deer right there, so like we could sit on that like right above there 150 yards where the like it's a top, so like it was pretty good right up there, and just wait and then slide in for
that's a great idea.
Power hour or whatever it is.
The other example that you used is like ground setup in those situations where that is a huge advantage is you can just sneak your whole way in and then you just
plop down.
And then you're done. You know, there's nothing else. I mean,
you don't have to worry about your, you know, and like we tape all of our stuff and whatnot, but you don't have to worry about, you know, clanking
or even this stresses me out too. And I was actually just talking with Greg about this is just when you, and this is actually something that really deters me from tree stand hunting is the amount of time that my eyes and ears aren't on to my surroundings. If I'm putting up a tree stand, son, I'm in that zone. That's what I'm doing. And I'm not saying I'm not listening at all, but it's way harder to be paying attention than when I'm just standing there with my bow.
Right.
If I'm just standing there with my bow, like I got all the confidence in the world that nothing's going to sneak up on me. I hate that feeling of like, ooh, I'm putting this stick up. What if I'm calling one in right now because he thinks I'm another deer? Ooh.
Whoa, that was weird.
We died.
No. I guess with that, that's our cue. Maybe hopefully we can use the audio of this camera, but yeah.
That's our cue to go scout for elk.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something. And sorry the audio got weird here at the end, but yeah, awesome. Thanks to John and Jake. And if you guys haven't already, check out Just Hunt Club. You won't be disappointed. And I've already probably flashed plenty of text, or well, I guess Keith has. Thanks, Keith. But yeah.
Hey, Keith, it was good talking to you, man.
Yeah, buddy.
Good job, Keith.
All right, guys. Catch you on the next one.
I'm starved.